This is chapter 8.4. We were talking previously about the biological approach to understanding drug abuse. Let's continue on with that. Use of these substances. So here we're talking about a variety of drugs: amphetamines, cocaine, heroin, alcohol, nicotine. Use of these substances results in a pattern of compulsive behavior that is based on an intense drive to repeat the experience. And let me say that let me add to the one point we made at the end of the last segment, which is how you can have these different drugs kind of having a similar influence in a person. And this sort of matches up with the finding that you do have individuals who are prone not to just one drug, but prone to a variety of drugs, and even things beyond drugs, like, say, gambling, a vulnerability to gambling addiction. That there are people who have personalities which tend to be vulnerable to getting addicted, to getting hooked on this, that, or the other, a variety of things, not just one thing. And you go to some Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, and you might see just about everybody there who's struggling with alcohol is also smoking cigarettes and also drinking lots of coffee, and may have had previous addictions or other sorts of addictions with other kinds of drugs going on at the same time. So you see that these drugs, even though they're different chemically, can kind of influence compulsive behavior in a variety of different ways in a person. In general, the similarities among all these drugs and across species are numerous enough to entertain the idea that there exists a common neurochemical system in the brain that links them all together. And this, I think, makes a lot of sense, that there's going to be a specific system within the brain. Different regions that are involved is very complicated, where it's going to take us a long time to figure out the brain because it's so complex. But it makes sense that you have these different regions working together, and they're different from one person to the next. And these differences can help explain why some individuals are vulnerable to dependency and addiction, while others are not, while others seem to be much more immune to that. There are two elements in understanding the intensely rewarding effect of certain psychoactive drugs. Number one, brain chemicals that are called neurotransmitters. They allow neurons in the brain to communicate with each other. So you've got all these nerve cells in your brain, billions of them, but they all have to work together to make the brain work. And so they're connected. They communicate with each other by passing these biochemicals from one neuron to the next one, these biochemicals that are called neurotransmitters. And they differ from one person to the next. And they are influenced, those neurotransmitters are influenced by drugs that have made their way into the brain. A specific neurotransmitter of interest with respect to drug abuse is dopamine. The textbook doesn't talk about it. Well, it does in a special section. But just what you should know about it is that dopamine tends to be a neurotransmitter, again, a chemical that connects one neuron brain cell to the next, is that dopamine tends to be about rewards. That more dopamine is sort of rewarding you for behavior. It's saying, hey, that this is a good thing that you're doing. Let's reward you with a nice hit of dopamine, which is going to make you feel good. So it's a feel-good sort of neurotransmitter that, again, from a functional perspective, is there to kind of reward behavior. It's associated with pleasure and feeling good. Number two is an area in the brain called the nucleus accumbens. It is evidently very important for this drug abuse problem, and it is connected and has a lot to do with the sensation of pleasure, of feeling good. And dopamine is tied in heavily with the nucleus accumbens. The significance of the nucleus accumbens is that animals will work hard to produce an increase in its activity. Nucleus accumbens gives you positive sensations of pleasure, makes you feel good, makes you have very positive kinds of feelings, the kind of feelings you want more. You'll work real hard, you'll repeat activities, and this is shown in laboratory research with animals, that you can get them to work really hard if doing so is going to get them some sort of drug which is going to activate that nucleus accumbens and get it really buzzing. And as a result, the animal feels pleasure, feels reward as a result of it. When laboratory animals are administered amphetamines, heroin, cocaine, alcohol, or nicotine, all different kinds of drugs, there is a rapid increase in the level of dopamine activity in the nucleus accumbens. So even though these are very different drugs, they're having the same effect on this region of the brain. They're pumping up the activity. They're pumping up the dopamine activity in this region of the brain. And it's associated with pleasure. Hence, most drugs target the brain's reward system. See, we're talking about a reward system here based on these biochemicals. By releasing a large amount of dopamine, activating feelings of euphoria, that just means feeling good, feeling really good, which reinforces continued drug use. So that's one of the reasons, kind of simple common sense reasons for drug use and abuse addiction, is that the stuff is so powerfully rewarding, that it's so pleasurable to the taker that causes them to really want to have that experience again. It's highly motivating, and that pushes them a step closer towards dependency and addiction. Administration of any substance that interferes with dopamine activity in this region eliminates the desire of animals to work for the self-administration of these abused drugs. So you could block this whole reward system, this dopamine system, with other sorts of drugs that could, that have a blocking effect, and that would stop these animals being so motivated to get that high again, to get more of that high. So it is a chemical process that can be blocked chemically. Thus, dopamine-related processes in the nucleus accumbens appear to underlie the reinforcing or rewarding effects of many abused drugs. Research also shows an involvement of the nucleus accumbens in compulsive gambling, so we're talking about the same kind of stuff, addiction of various types, not just drug addiction, and eating disorders as well. So it's implicated, the nucleus accumbens and dopamine and pleasure is connected to a lot of different problematic behaviors, not just drug abuse. In one study, specific study here, 23 drug-free men, no history of drug abuse, were given doses of Ritalin, which is a psychoactive stimulant for adults. We know it's given to hyperactive children, but the way it typically works in adults is it's a stimulant. It kind of cranks up the system. 12 of the men in this study experienced a pleasant feeling. 9 felt annoyed or distrustful, so negative emotions, negative feelings. 2 felt nothing at all. So this is a very small study, and it's only suggestive. We can't have too much confidence in it, but it's an example of the type of study which shows that people in this who seem to be similar, no history of drug abuse, they're responding very differently to the same drug because everybody's different. Each person is unique genetically, unique physiologically. We're all put together a little different than our neighbor, and so we react to things differently. The men with the least concentration of dopamine receptors were the ones experiencing pleasant effects. Individuals with the fewest dopamine receptors might be the most vulnerable to drug abuse. So I guess a way you could think of it is if you don't have very many dopamine receptors, you really like the effect of drugs because drugs pump up this dopamine, this reward system, this feeling of pleasure, more so than maybe somebody who has a lot of dopamine receptors. These are receptors we're talking about. They receive the dopamine and then get stimulated and move down the neuron, move down the nerve cell, and keep that stimulation, that communication going down the line. So it could be that these people who have few of those receptors, they're not, under normal conditions, they're not getting so much pleasure. But then you hit them with the drug and the dopamine goes way up. They're feeling something that they don't normally feel, and it's like really pleasurable, more so than for other people. Continued drug use causes the brain to adjust. This is a very important principle I want you to get from this chapter. The brain counteracts surges in dopamine and other neurotransmitters from drug use by producing less dopamine and decreasing the receptors that are actually that are receiving the dopamine. That can receive signals. So it's a principle that I talked about before, equilibrium in the body, equilibrium in the brain. That if you're getting high levels of something, the brain tends to to counteract that because it likes things to be kind of stable. And if you pump up and really add this dynamic aspect to the brain with these new high levels of dopamine, it wants to tamp that down to get back to a balanced level. And so you can get the decreasing effect. And the way it gets done is, like they're saying, it can tamp down the amount of dopamine, and it can also decrease the number of receptors in these cells that are receiving the dopamine. If there's fewer of those, then there's going to be less signaling. There's going to be less pleasure involved, less kind of response to the dopamine that you're getting. This makes it difficult for a drug abuser to experience feelings of pleasure naturally. This is why drug abusers often look and feel flat or burned out. This is also a contributor to the drug tolerance problem we talked about before, where individuals have to take more of a substance to get the same high because your body is counteracting. Your body is downshifting and to try to kind of restore that balance. And so you're needing to take more and more to get that same high.